Hi, I'm Margie Abbott, and I'm excited today to share a workshop with you called Set Free to Homeschool. It's not traditional school. We did homeschool for about 30 years, and we began to realize that over those years we learned so much. But at the very beginning, I had to realize that I had a public school trained brain. Most of us do when we come out of a public school education. We don't really have anything else to compare it to. We started in the 1980s, and so I definitely thought that, I needed a schoolroom, and it was about teachers lecturing and school desks and posters. I put up bulletin boards, we gave tests, and we had lots of workbooks, but that wasn't much fun. And pretty soon I began to realize that maybe this isn't where education happens. I was making it look like school, but maybe this isn't where education happens. So I began to look around and realize that it was a big hindrance for a lot of people. We as parents that went to traditional school think it needs to look like real school. But homeschoolers tended to replicate that into their homeschool and became almost just as frustrated as we would have been if we had sent them on to traditional school. So what I had to realize is I needed to erase my public school trained brain. I just needed to clean the chalkboard and just realize that wasn't going to be the best way to educate my children. So I realized first off that we need to keep it a lot simpler than all the complicated things I thought I needed to do. The education is kind of natural. We want to learn, and children want to learn. So let's just talk about the basics. If you're starting out homeschooling and you've got, say, a K through 8th grader, your basics are reading, writing, and arithmetic. My grandmother used to say, reading, writing, and arithmetic, that's what counts. So those are the things that we can just learn naturally through a lot of things that we do. But those are the basic things you're looking at. Simply thing is too is that not all children learn the same way. So lots of times we want to have one program, one thing, one size fits all for all of our children, but that is just not the way it works. God created all of our children individually. We realized that more and more as we had 6 children, and none of them were the same. None of them seemed to have the same learning styles. And we had to realize that if we wanted to give them a really good education, we needed to be willing to not do everything the same way. So then we had to kind of look at it and say, what do your students really need to actually learn? What do they need to know to move forward and be successful? So here's some helpful hints. We'll just start at the beginning. If they're K through 8th grade, you're mainly working on math. When they're really little, you're doing phonics and teaching them to read. Then you'll have some language arts. They may learn some grammar and some handwriting and different things that go along with that. And 2 other subjects. Usually they're science and social studies, but they're not required. It can be art and PE. Typically you'll aim at having about 4 things that you're working on, but those main things are math and your reading or language arts. So what is math made up of? And those fundamental math skills are addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, fractions, decimals, and percents. And they don't necessarily have to be learned by a workbook. Sometimes for some children, this is majorly done and very easily done by having games and it can be a card game, it could be a computer game, it could just be counting things as you go along and talking about it. We had one child that struggled with the fractions, decimals, and percents. So we might take a pie and cut it and figure out, do you want a 16th of this pie or do you want a 4th of this pie? And we thought it was kind of funny that sometimes the kids would go, oh, we want a 16th, because they thought 16 would be more than 4. But when we gave them the little sliver and we could take the quarter of the pie, then suddenly they began to understand fractions. Then the percentages, we might go shopping and talk about discounts, and so different things. But never think that these are not valuable tools, because I ended up being an accountant for many, many years, and all that math I ever used, even though I'd learned all the geeky math in high school, this is the math I used: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, fractions, decimals, and percents, and they let me use a calculator. So these are valuable tools that'll be probably the basics of what your student needs going forward. Then we want to talk a little bit about language arts. And, typically that is reading and writing. Not every child learns those things the same way or at the same time, but language arts typically includes phonics, handwriting, literature, composition, spelling, grammar, any of those combinations, you've got language arts. So you can really cater that to where your children are, what they need. We don't have to spend time doing things that they don't need. If they've already learned how to put a period at the sentence, you don't have to, be doing workbooks with lots of those extra lessons. So this gives you a lot of freedom and flexibility to use your time efficiently to teach each child at the speed they need to go. You don't have to go, really fast. You don't have to rush, but you don't have to go slow. If they're really getting it, you can move on. So every child is going to get to have that individual education plan. Also, when you're looking at K through 8th grade, one of the simple things is you can do is just that keep past satisfactory excellent. If you're having to report to a school district or an umbrella school, you can keep it super simple and just for these younger grades, past satisfactory excellent grades. If they are not high school courses, they don't need ABC grades. And these are not figured by test scores. You work right next to your child. You're right there. You know what they know. You know what they don't know. So feel free to, just observe. And you don't have to give tests to know that. If we did use tests, they were mainly just to show us where we might need to go back over things. And this is called mastery learning. So homeschooling allows you, and I think this is pretty instinctive for most parents, that if your child is struggling with something that you feel is important, you can go back over it. We have the time. We're not trying to rush along a class schedule. We can slow down and take the time it needs for our children to actually master these topics that we feel are important. And that definitely increases the education and the retention of information. So one of your biggest tasks in this K through 8th grades is to help your child develop a love for learning. Unfortunately, a lot of the times it's just read a book, take a test. And so it becomes boring. And so they lose some of that love for learning that's natural among children. So they can develop that love for learning through experiential learning, unit studies, games, field trips. All of this counts as school. And school should be fun. School should be allowing them to love to learn. So sometimes people are asking me about attendance, and that's another thing we can keep super simple. People say, "Did you keep record of your attendance?" And I said, "No, not really," because I realized really early on that I wasn't doing 180 days of school. It wasn't just when my kids were sitting in front of a desk or a book or in front of a computer. School is 365 days a year. Everything we did was school. Every day was a school day. And the world was our classroom. Everything we did was education. We tied it into every single thing that we were doing. So it wasn't like it was just based on so many hours a day. So sometimes people say, "Well, you're supposed to do 4 to 6 hours a day." I said, "I homeschool from the minute they get up to the minute they go to bed." I never missed an opportunity to teach them something that helped develop that love for learning that we were talking about. It's going to be everywhere you go. Everything you do is going to be about that love for learning. And so it might be sitting at the kitchen table or a picnic table. It might be on a couch or a recliner. It might be on the floor with a box of Legos. I always talk about this. One of our sons just we tried to get him to sit down next to me to read, and he wouldn't remember anything I read. And so one day I put him down on the floor with a box of Legos because that seemed to be one of the main things that would hold his attention. And everybody told us he was ADHD. And I said, "No, he's not, because he'll play at Legos for hours. He'll build and build." So one day I set him down to do his little Legos while I was reading to everybody else. And all of a sudden, this child that never had an answer had all the answers. And I thought, what in the world? And then all of a sudden I realized he is a multitasker. He really needs to have more than one thing going on. Now, some people, that's not good. They don't like that. But for this child, it was extremely helpful for him to have more than one thing going on. And then he could comprehend even more. So we had to keep that in mind the whole way through his education, is that he would do better if we would give him multiple things to do, or he had more tasks. So when you watch the high school webinar, you can find out even more about what his high school looks like. But education can be on a porch, a deck, a swing, the park, the grocery store, in the car. We had this thing called the Natural Speller that we did with our kids in the car. I bought one book and taught all my kids how to spell through that book. And I could talk about that again in another video. We had all these different ways. You're learning if you're on a vacation or you're taking a field trip. The world truly is your classroom to be able to go ahead and teach your children whatever they need to know. So the next thing, it is truly, remember, the world is your classroom. Everything's a learning opportunity. I would say sometimes we needed to have a class schedule. I actually had a schedule on my wall when our kids were little, and it had get up at 7 and do math at 8 and English at 9 and science at 10 and social studies 11. That whole schedule, like I thought we need to do to have school. So let's talk about his class schedule. You know, a lot of times we are familiar with kids going to school and doing 6 periods a day, 45 to 55 minutes in a period, maybe less today. 5 or 10 minutes to teach in each period, in each class period, is what they know statistically is really happening. So that means it could be a whole week of science classes. They might get 25 to 50 minutes of somebody actually telling them information. So it's not as much education going on in traditional school as you might think, just because they're gone so long from you to school. But when you're at home, you're not changing subjects every hour. You're not limited to that. You can do one subject a day. You know, you could decide, I'm gonna have science on Monday and we're gonna do social studies on Wednesday, maybe do a little bit of math 2 or 3 days a week. You know, you can figure out what works in your schedule, so you can work your school around your life instead of having to work your life around your school. We typically did some schoolwork in the mornings, about 4 days a week. The 5th day was field trips, experiments, clean your house up day, whatever we needed, but we did not need 5 days a week to be sitting in front of workbooks and things. It just does not take as long to homeschool as it does to send them off to traditional school. You could use a block schedule where you're teaching, maybe we're just going to do science in the fall and we're going to do social studies in the spring. You can use afternoons, evenings, weekends. We were always able to flex our schedule around so that our students were able to do different things. I love this because sometimes we think learning has to always be out of a workbook, but kids are natural learners, curious learners, explorers, adventurers. They're mess makers. Just expect homeschooling should not always be super neat and proper. It sometimes can look really messy, but that's okay. I actually had times in my house that looked like this a lot, where the kids would be exploring and I would think, oh, you're just making a mess. And it wasn't they're just making a mess. It means they're thinking, their little brains are clicking. We recently had an experience with one of our grandsons who we were sitting at the table, and he picked up a bowl he had been eating out of, and he stuck it up next to his face, and he started making sounds in the bowl. You know, my first instinct was to say, put your bowl down and quit playing with your dishes. But I got to watch him, and he grabbed his sister's bowl, which was a little different, a little bit bigger, and he pulled that one up here, and he had this one here, and he's talking and back and forth into these bowls. And I realized he was hearing the pitch and the sound and listening to how it was different. Sometimes we got to slow down just a little bit and realize that there might be an educational experience actually going on when we think all that's happening is making a mess. Our job as parents is to steer that curiosity in the right direction, hopefully with as little mess as possible, but sometimes there'll be a mess. And so it's an important fact that we retain more if we're having fun. You know, this was a big thing when I first started homeschooling. I would hear parents talk about, oh, my kids just cried and cried over that math lesson or writing or whatever. And I began to realize that I think the brain literally just shuts down when it's under stress, when it's frustrated, aggravated, angry. So you're really not getting anywhere if your students, if it's just not working. It could be that not necessarily that the student is rebelling against learning. It may be more that the student is just not learning the way it's being presented. And so we have the option to do something different. If it wasn't working, we could change. Today, there's thousands of options out there. So find something that's going to be fun, a way that your student can learn. That's what matters. It doesn't matter that they check off all the workbook pages and things like it. It matters that your student's actually learning. So let's talk a little bit about some statistics I ran across. I was a geeky cost accountant, so I looked at everything. Is it worth your time, money, and energy? And is it going to give you the product that you want? So when I brought this to my education of my children, I began to realize that the product I wanted was not schooling my children. It was educating my children. And so I began to research and try to figure out what is they know about retention of information. I was kind of surprised that I ran across lots of statistics that lined up with this particular one, is that they know that if a student only reads, takes tests, and are lectured to, their long-term retention will be about 5 to 10% of that information. Now, that might surprise some of you because that is the way we were educated, but it also explains a lot of my education. I did really well in school, but by the time we got to first grade, I didn't even know what was in a first grade history book. And I thought it was pretty interesting. I couldn't understand why I didn't retain the information long term. And I began to realize through these statistics that pretty much all we did was read, take tests, and were lectured to. But they know if they do hands-on and audio-visual and field trips and demonstrations, and they can verbally talk to you and tell you what they know, the retention of information goes to about 90%. Man, that would get me out of my cost accountant in the box world, was to realize if I did it different, I could shoot for the 90 rather than just settle for the 5 or 10. I also love this quote by Mr. Rogers. When we were growing up there, we loved Mr. Rogers. But he said, play gives children a chance to practice what they are learning. And they do. The kids are learning, and when they learn, that, I always said that we might read books and then go do a field trip about something we're learning, or we might be out doing a field trip or be outside in the backyard and learn about something, see something, and then come back in the house or go to the library and get books to learn more about whatever we've experienced. So let's talk about reading. Why do traditional school trained parents tend to think that the most important way to learn is reading, or the only way to learn? So we get stuck in that box of read a book, take a test. Reading is important to attain additional information for what is being learned experientially, to spark an interest in something else to learn about. Reading is good, but not all kids read well. And so it can be very hard on a student that doesn't read well. And it isn't the only way to learn. We do learn a lot through play. Play is our brain's favorite way to learn, experiential learning. So even if we did read something in a book, we went and found something fun to do with it. Sometimes learning looks like this. We used to run co-ops for years, and when we went into our homeschool co-op, it was not about being lectured to. You would be given very little instructions, lots of hands-on, lots of talking and teaching even while we were doing the fun things. So somebody might walk into one of our co-ops and said, "Oh, how chaotic," and I would say, it is constructed chaos, because we planned out, because through all those activities they learn motor skills, organizational skills, number skills, classifications, comprehension, cooperation, language development, story development. We would have our kids talk back and forth and tell us, what they were learning, explain what they learned. They would learn hand-eye coordination. They'd learn how to problem solve, and they learned conceptual skills along with the facts and things that we were studying about in our co-op. I love this quote by Albert Einstein. It says, play is the highest form of research. And it is. They play and they get curious and they want to go learn some more. I loved it when my kids walked up to me and said, "Oh, why does it work this way?" And I would say, "Oh, I'm not sure whether I did or not." And I said, "Let's go look up more about it." We might go look a book up. But as they got older, we were able to say, "How about you go find out and let us know?" Because I really never met a teenager that didn't like to tell their parents something they didn't know. So how possibly can our children get a good education and learn everything they need to know, having so much play and fun? This is exactly what I got said to me a lot, as we did not do things traditionally as we went along through our 30 years of homeschooling. As our children were different, we began to love field trips. We loved doing games. We loved doing other things that would make a difference and help our kids learning. I didn't really worry I was teaching them everything. I wanted to teach them to love to learn. Unschooling is a term that we hear a lot today, and there are some ways to think about this. Today, we probably think about it as an educational method or philosophy that advocates the learner's chosen activities as the primary means of learning. Typically it's where the kids pick out what they want to learn. What we want to see is the children's pursuit of knowledge, not knowledge in pursuit of the children. That was a George Shaw quote that was really good. But where the confusion came in back as I started homeschooling is the unschooled is an old word. Out of the dictionary, it meant uneducated, untaught, not educated at school, not made to attend school. And so, oh my goodness, that's not what we were doing. We were not necessarily leaving our kids untrained or undisciplined. The very opposite was happening. They were provided with an education, just not in a school setting. So I like to refer to it as directed experiential learning, non-traditional education. We guide our students towards topics. There's a lot of topics our kids would have never thought to learn about if we had not guided them through what that would look like. Will we teach our children everything they need to know? I got asked this a lot. And I always like to say, did your traditional education teach you everything you need to know? Or did you have to keep learning after you got out of school? And of course, we had to keep learning. I've learned my whole life, and I love to learn. And I'm learning something probably every day. We do want to teach our children to love to learn. Students retain more information if they're having fun, so we want them to love to learn. So here's a quote. I've said this for years because it brings me a lot of peace. You will never teach your student everything they need to know, but if you teach them to love to learn, they will learn the rest of their lives. So if your student is not liking the way you're teaching them, or they're not interested in the subject, it's okay. You don't have to teach them every subject. They can know that is a subject out there. But if they ever needed to know more, they could come back and learn more later. So it's really okay to just allow your children to love to learn whatever they're interested in learning. And as they get older, they'll know how to learn and they'll want to learn. So here again is our pyramid that reminds us, it's another graph of a statistics that it's not about lecturing and reading and taking tests all the time. It's about the audiovisual, the demonstrations, the field trips, and the verbally telling somebody what they have learned. That's the best thing. Talk to your kids. Get them talking. Get them excited about telling you what they've learned. And a lot of times we'd even do it at night. We'd be around the dining room table and I might be asking them questions to tell their dad what they learned. Because there is a big difference between teaching and learning. Completing books or workbook pages or checking off computer assignments does not mean the student is learning. This teacher's trying really hard, but this student's not grasping it. So we need to have different ways we use to teach our children besides just lecturing and taking tests and reading. One thing that we did that was super fun, that really became the standard of our approach to education, was a unit study approach to learning. And what a unit study does is it hooks all the subjects together. So you may have, it didn't mean we didn't use a math curriculum because math is taught in order, but that we would bring out some math skills in it, social studies, English skills, science, art. We might be reading books about a topic. We might study Indians. And under Indians, we might read books about Indians. We might get we did get a map and put it on our dining room table and plot out all the major Indian tribes. So we're learning the geography of that. We also made costumes. That was art. We might weave material or blankets or even paper to show how they wove their, and go see somebody card wool or whatever. We would do something that would talk about how they made their clothes. We might go see somehow somebody tans leather. We might, which is also science. We might learn about the animals that they tracked and trapped while, because they had to be very attentive to nature, and they would have been able to do that. So we tied all these things together. Studies also gave us the opportunity to do this with one child or several children, to adapt to different learning styles. It helped us discover unique talents and gifts in individual students. Of each of the students, I had a student in one of the first co-ops I ever taught in, and he was ADHD. I never heard of it back in the late 80s. Never heard of ADHD, but everybody seemed kind of afraid of it. They were like, how's this kid going to work out? Is this going to be a good fit? And I was totally fascinated with this young man, because we would do science projects where the kids had to figure something out, and he would be the one that figured it out. One time we were doing one where we had 2 stacks of books, and we gave them a piece of paper, and they had to figure out how to make a bridge with that piece of paper that would hold pennies. And, we didn't tell him how to do it, but it wasn't very long at all that this little boy with ADHD folded that paper like an accordion, and he set it over the 2 books where the ends are on each stack of books, and began to stack pennies on it. And we asked him, how did you know to do that? And he said, well, I just thought about what I had seen when I looked at bridges. We just drive over them. This kid had actually seen that there was a structural thing to that, and he was the one that answered it. And it was several other times when we were facing science projects that he was the one that figured it out. And so it was so good that we were able to do things that allowed the students show out their gifts and talents. Some kids are really great with book learning and memorizing facts. My oldest son was like that. My oldest daughter was very artistic, and she could draw. My oldest son was like me. He couldn't draw stick people. One day in co-op, we were given an assignment as a family to take a big piece of paper and draw North and South America from a picture in a book. And I'm looking at it going, oh my goodness. My daughter quickly took her pencil, in a matter of just a few minutes had what definitely was North and South America drawn on a piece of paper. You get to interact with other families with activities and field trips that connect you to what you're studying. Also, it gave us the opportunity to connect with other families to talk about our kids and get ideas and be encouraged. It was a real blessing to work together. You kind of get the best of both worlds in a unit study. There's kind of some traditional learning. We did read books. We did have them write things, but we also did a whole lot of student-led exploration, and we had a structure of how we covered things. So when we were doing the Indians, we were talking about attentiveness and how they're attentive to nature. But we'd also done a unit on music and hearing. We had learned scripture, we had learned Bible, we'd done all these different things. It doesn't matter how your child learns, it matters that they learn. So I encourage you to look for what makes your child's light bulbs come on. What is helping them to actually learn? And that's the right way to homeschool that child. And it might be different than another child that lives in your home. It might be different than your neighbor's child. But one of the hardest things, I think, for us public school trained parents is to get out of our comfort zone and enter into a learning zone. This is where the magic happens. We get out of the comfort zone, and we're able to step into where you see what's happening. This is where the light bulbs come on. And this is so important, because otherwise your student might not anywhere close to meet their potential, because they're so busy trying to fit in a method of education that doesn't work for them at all. But we use excuses. It takes too much time to do that. I'm not that creative. Well, I don't learn that way. It's easier just to give them workbooks and have them do it on the computer. I could use all these excuses and have used some of them, but I realized if I really wanted my child to have a good education, I needed to do something different. And I began to realize that a comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing grows there. My kids were not going to grow if I stayed in my traditional brain way comfort zone of doing things. I also realized that kids sometimes, or at least mine, kind of felt like that they were like little houses. My oldest son, we put anything in front of him, he just sucked it right in the front door. We didn't even have to knock on the door. He was learning stuff before we ever thought about him learning it. And we thought, oh, this is so easy. We're such great, home educators. And then we got child two, and she only wanted to learn when she was ready to learn. So sometimes I was having to sneak up through the basement or do something to try to figure out what was going to help her to want to open up her doors to learn. Child three was just all over the place. And so sometimes you just had to slow him down somewhere up for 5 or 10 seconds to teach him something. Child four was very pretty easy to teach, but had some learning struggles. And so she learned to read early, but she had struggles pronouncing certain big words. And so we worked with that. And child five had major learning issues with dyslexia and a lot of other things she would have probably been diagnosed with if we had have had that back then. But we figured out how to get her information into her house. And sometimes it was coming down the chimney, and sometimes it was entering a side window or up through the basement. It took whatever it took. She became equipped enough to go on to college and continue to learn, which never was something on our radar for her in the beginning. The other thing you really will help you is to realize that you need to own your curriculum and don't let it own you. We buy workbooks and we think we've got to cross every T and dot every I. We think that it's not complete till you've finished the last page. I was told by a man that worked with curriculum, and he said, oh, well, it's kind of designed if you've gotten 80 to 85% done that they consider it done. So they don't really design books for you to complete them. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're getting to about beginning of May and you're not done, it's okay to just stop, and you don't have to finish the book, because a lot of things are repeated again the next year if you are in a curriculum based education, that's what you've chosen for your family. But a lot of times that curriculum was so onerous that I've got parents working through the summer to make sure they have finished it all, and that is not freedom. Our children need their summers for their brains to rest, for them to be able to uh, stop and just think about other things and just think about yourself. It's just good to have a break. So take your summer. And I have a little sign that says best part about school is June, July, and August. Take your summer break. Let that be a time to do all the fresh air, sunshine education. So as I've gone through this, I hope you felt some of the traditional school brain chains fall off, and that you can begin to be set free to homeschool in the way that works best for each of your individual children, because that is where you really are going to find the most joy in this journey. Imagine if schools actually helped kids identify their strengths by exploring their talents from a young age and growing their skills over the 12 years, instead of letting them all follow the same routine and leaving them confused in life after graduation. That is what we really want to aim for here. And so sometimes people go, oh my gosh, but that helped me with the younger ones, but what about high school? So I have another webinar that you can watch that's called How to Survive High School and Enjoy the Journey. It was called a long time, Don't Stress Out Over High School. So if you've looked for that webinar, this is the replacement for Don't Stress Out Over High School. And I'll look forward to seeing you again and working with you again in that webinar. Also, I just want to talk to you about what you'll learn in that webinar. How to teach those core subjects of high school to students with challenges. What's actually needed? What do you really need to graduate and succeed in life? Differences between a modified education and accommodations for high school. How to earn credits counting hours instead of textbooks. How to turn a textbook into hands-on learning. And how to teach to the oldest child when you've got or I call it age integrated learning, when you've got several children in your house. And so we also are going to, there's going to be a lot more covered in there. I do go through every subject area of high school and give you ideas of ways to do it that are efficient. It needs to be worth your time, your money, and your energy, and it needs to actually produce an education, not just schooling. And so hopefully you can enjoy that as well. I'm excited to also tell you about the homeschool counseling team. You can reach out to the homeschool counseling team. We do give one-on-one conversations with parents. You can sign up to do that, and you can go to the homeschoolcounselingteam.com. And you can email me at setfreetohomeschool@gmail.com, or you can set up a call with me at this Calendly, and I'll be glad to talk to you. So just let us know what we can do, and I hope that you'll come back to listen to a whole bunch more. I hope you'll click subscribe and ring the bell or whatever you're supposed to do to get notified, because we are going to produce more and more of these webinars to help you be set free to homeschool and enjoy your journey.